Hi, my name is Charlton Singleton. I am the artist and residence emeritus here at the Gilliard Center, and welcome to another episode of Raising the Volume. Today, our guest is, you know what, and this might be a pun, a man of many hats. You know, but I always think of
The Ranger hat.
the Ranger hat. Today, our guest is Mr. Michael Allen. Welcome to the show, sir, and I appreciate you being here through your busy schedule. I say busy schedule because I always equate you to like my parents, who I say retired from their real job because they had so much other stuff to do, you know. But welcome. I appreciate you being here with us today.
And I'm grateful for this opportunity, Charlton. You and I, we go a long ways
Yes,
back.
absolutely.
And I just am honored to sit on this illustrious stage with you this morning.
Thank you,
sir.
thank you. So let's start. Let's just work our way from the beginning all the way up to now. You are from King Street.
Yeah, I grew up in King Street. That's home. Actually, I moved here to Mount Pleasant after finishing college in 1982. So in effect, I guess Mount Pleasant is home now, but the rearing place is King Street.
Of
You're
course,
correct.
of course, and everybody's going to ask you, you know, like when I go out of town, and people say, "Well, where are you from?" And I say, "Well, I'm from a little, you know, town called Allendale." And they said, "Well, what's that near?" And I said, "Well, it's next to Mount Pleasant, and then you get to Charleston." It's like, "Oh, so it's outside of Charleston." I was like, "Well, kinda nowadays." And you know, so you're from Charleston? I was like, "No, no, I'm from Allendale." And then within Allendale, I'm from 10 Mile. You know, within
Right.
Allendale. So you have to be specific. But yeah,
Yes.
King Street. Now, I have a question. Is King Street considered Low Country?
Well, it has Gullah cultural tendencies there, attributes. It's sometimes referred to as a part of the lower PD, but I think from a cultural perspective, its connectivity to hit the Low Country is probably stronger.
All right, all right.
So we won't get into a geographical debate this morning.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. Now, you said you moved to Mount Pleasant after you graduated from college. Which college?
Yes, as you are, a SC State grad.
That's right, South
Class
Carolina
of
State.
1982. I started there in the fall of 1980, really with the intent of potentially sitting and becoming a teacher. And so I had an opportunity in my history class to begin, you know, shaping my opportunities for history and culture. And I would say the fall of 1978 was a defining, I guess, moment for me in my life. One of my history professors, Dr. Bill Hine, who lives in Mount Pleasant now, he's
Okay.
retired.
Okay.
Our class book that we were using, a textbook, was called Black Majority, written by Dr. Peter Wood, whom I was with 2 weeks ago at
Okay.
a public conference here. And in reading that book, I really began to see myself from a history, cultural perspective. The sad thing about, I have to say, Charlton, is that things that I may have been doing and partaking that had Gullah roots, Gullah connectivity, I saw all those things highlighted and explained and digested in the book. And so it was like an aha moment. Now I know who I am, I know from which I've come, and I know the greatness that's within me. And so that's really has been a guiding star for me from that point to where I'm sitting on the stage with you now.
So you're at South Carolina State, and you said you're studying history.
Yes,
And you wanted to be a teacher.
yes.
How did it trans? You know, I guess how did it
To the National Park
change?
Service?
Yes, yes.
Well, 2 years later, Dr. Hines came to me and said that the National Park Service will be coming soon to do some recruiting for young African American students who may want to consider, you know, a summer opportunity with the National Park Service in Charleston.
Time out. Right there. Hold on. Now, first of all, explain exactly what the National Park Service does.
Okay. The National Park Service is a federal agency that was established in August of 1916. It's a part of the Department of the Interior. Its primary objective or mission is to preserve, to protect important features, landscapes, buildings, structures of our American experience. So here in the Charleston vicinity, there are approximately 4 physical spaces that the National Park Service manages. Fort Sumter, out in the harbor of Charleston, probably 5 miles from where we're sitting now.
Right, right.
Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island, which is probably 3-4 miles from where we're sitting now. the Charles Pinckney National Historic Site, that's on Long Point Road in Mount Pleasant. And then probably a couple blocks from where we're sitting now, Liberty Square, which is the departure site adjacent to the South Carolina Aquarium that takes you out to Fort Sumter. That's 4. And then also, since 2006, we've been living and breathing and sitting this morning in the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, which is a National Park Service project program, which I helped to bring on board, which extends from Wilmington, North Carolina, all the way to St. Augustine, Florida.
St. Augustine, Florida. All right. Thank you for clearing that up because I have to adjust that. Being in the band Ranky Tanky, when I go out on the road, and part of our show is, be honest, is to educate some of our concert goers. I always say from Wilmington, and I always give them a bigger landmark and say around Jacksonville.
Okay.
You know, so I'll make sure that I say St. Augustine.
And let me tell you why. Last week, I think either 8th or 9th of September, was the anniversary of the Stoner Rebellion of 1739. That rebellion, that uprising, was led by African American people, African really, on a quest to go to St. Augustine.
Oh, okay.
Because the Spanish put out an edict in the early 1700s that said any African that can escape English colonies, make it to St. Augustine, convert to Catholicism, would be free. So in September of 1738, without a map, without GPS, without Google, without Interstate 95, people were heading to St. Augustine. Unfortunately, that party that had banded together to head to St. Augustine encountered a patrolling group of white men who patrolled coastal South Carolina, which led from one thing to the next, which in effect brought that opportunity for freedom to an end. And that's the Stoner Rebellion of 1739.
Got it. So now,
that's why St. Augustine is connected to the corridor.
Got it.
History lesson this morning.
Thank you, because I'm sure I'm going to use that too. So now let's go back.
Okay.
So
Dr.
They're recruiting.
Right, the Park Service is coming to recruit. And so I said, well, okay, what the heck? You know, opportunity to make some cash, come back to college. And I always got college credit for it as well. And I'm living on Sullivan's Island. So I put my name in a hat, and I interviewed a number of folks interviewed. And I found out, I guess within a month later or so, that I was one of the 2 persons selected. Well, unfortunately, at the last moment, one of the other guys backed out, so he didn't come. So on June the 1st, 1980, I found myself on Sullivan's Island beginning my National Park Service journey. Then working at Fort Moultrie, Sullivan's Island, and working at Fort Sumter, you know, the pivotal point in our American experience, then and now. And so, you know, that's what I was doing. And somewhere in the middle of the month of June, I had some encounters that I had to find a way internally to digest. And these encounters were asked of me by the traveling public. Why are you here at Fort Sumter? And what do you, as a black man, have to do with the story of the American Civil War? And how do you tie into the history of Fort Sumter? And then I guess the more provocative question is, what version of the Civil War will you be telling me? Northern, Southern, Western, Park Service, whatever. And so that hit me kind of hard. You know, I was in the uniform as everyone else. I was clearly identified as an employee. But why was I asked these questions? So I had to kind of think long and hard on that. So I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell my coworker, didn't tell my boss. I didn't do anything. So I said, well, maybe what I should do is look at where I'm working through the eyes of the public, not through the eyes of as an employee. So the first thing I did is I went and looked in the gift shop, as you would do at any historic site.
Right.
So as I looked in the gift shop, looked at the books and titles that were offered to the traveling public, to the visitors, I wasn't in the gift shop.
Of course.
In terms of books and titles relating the African-American black story to the Civil War. Okay. So the next thing I did, I walked and looked around the museum with different eyes, if you will. And then after looking in that facility, I wasn't in the museum either. Maybe a sentence or two, but that was it.
Yeah.
And then it quickly came to me, I said, well, Mike, this museum was built in 1961. You would not be in here. And then the next thing, I actually began listening to what my former co-workers were saying about the history, culture of the place. And I really was in what they were saying as well. And so somewhere in mid-June of 1980, this thought came to mind. Either I'm out of place, being at this transitional place in American experience, or maybe the National Park Service is out of touch. And I did not believe within my heart and my mind and my spirit that I was out of place.
Right.
And so to be truthful about it, as I say now, that experience, again, was another guiding post to who I am, to what I've done, where I've been, what I've advocated, and what I have encouraged over the past 40 years. And I don't think I've deviated from that experience of June of 1980.
All right. So now, I mean, I have always seen you in print, in person, on television or whatever, and you have been telling different stories about the, whether it, like you gave an example about the Stonewall Rebellion. I remember specifically one of the last programs that I was involved with you were when we were on
Sullivan's
Island. Could you talk a little bit about what the significance of Sullivan's Island is?
Okay. Well, ironically, when I began working at Fort Sumter in Fort Moultrie in the summer of 1980, I had some knowledge of Sullivan's Island thanks to Peter Wood's book, Black Majority. But for those who may not know in the Low Country, between 1708 to the late 1700s, any vessel bearing cargo, as what the colony of South Carolina said in law, they were required to quarantine this cargo on Sullivan's Island for up to 10 days. So the first experience of people of African descent that came to the colony of South Carolina that may have come through the port of Charleston was Sullivan's Island. So we believe today that 40% of all people of color that survived the Middle Passage, that came across the Atlantic Ocean, that arrived in North America, first stepped foot on North American soil on Sullivan's Island. That's the significance today and then. And so, unfortunately, when I began my journey working for the Park Service, that really was not discussed, articulated, or even dealt with. And so, again, that was one of my early touchstones, is just bringing in awareness and understanding and acknowledgement that the very island adjacent to the very fort that we are managing have significance internationally, nationally, regionally, colonial-wise, and modern-wise. And that needs to be addressed.
It does.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Middle Passage.
Yes.
There is still a Middle Passage sort of ceremony. What is
Yeah,
it?
it's called Remembrance, right, ceremony. I think this past June was the 25th anniversary, and I was involved with that this past June. Actually, I was involved with the first one.
Right, yeah.
Because he actually approached the National Park Service about using the Park Service facility in order to carry this out. It's in conjunction with other port cities around the United States and around the diaspora that have selected this day in June to have a conversation about the arrival, the diffusion, the legacy, the history of African people in the New World. And so I'm grateful, as a person who was a part of this remembrance ceremony that's still carried on out today. So, but to your earlier question, so we found ourselves in 2020 betwixt and between, if you will, a pandemic, social unrest, political upheaval, and challenges to the Republic of the United States, the nation of the United States. And so somewhere within me, I said there needs to be a conversation about history, culture, and the intersection of history, culture, the African experience, and where we are now in a social construct. And so that's how I and others were able to pull together this conversation of historians on Sullivan's Island. We did it adjacent to Fort Moultrie. We actually did it in front of the African importation marker, which was dedicated in 1999 by most of the major African American at that time high schools, Burke, St. John, Barnes Wilson, and the like. And so it was ironic and it was historic that there was a conversation about history, culture, and our whole social journey at that physical space. And I'm grateful for you, sir, for being a part of it, kind of closing us out through amazing grace and the opportunity for us to honor those who didn't make the journey or survive the journey by throwing roses into the Atlantic Ocean. And I think it was symbolic for your part of that narrative in playing Amazing Grace, because that's the story of a captain who was a partaker in the African slave trade.
Yep.
But through grace, he recognized the error of his ways. And so it now brings us to Amazing Grace. So I'm grateful. And I thought about you, I'm going to be honest, Sunday night and watching The Woman King. Yes, because that also is the story of the African experience, its connectivity to the African slave trade. And to be honest, a subject matter that we don't talk about often, that's the complicit nature of Africans in the African slave trade. I'm not giving away the whole story.
Right.
But anyhow, and so there were intersections. You know, what I saw in the movies on the other side of the Atlantic, but where I worked on Sullivan's Island is on this side of the Atlantic.
Right.
There's a connectivity. You can't separate. And I just want to say that often people look at the history of our nation as just on this side of the Atlantic. That's not right. That's not fair. Our tentacles, our history also crosses the other side. Just as hurricanes cross, our story crosses.
Right. One of the unfortunate realities, like you said, is that we have graves that are, underneath buildings that no one is recognizing.
Yeah, and I think that's so important that we first have to acknowledge the past and the history. We're sitting now probably 3 blocks, 4 blocks from the soon-to-be open International African American Museum.
Correct.
The very ground that it sits on, the aquarium sits on, the Fort Sumter tour boat facility sits on, was Gaston's Wharf. That's the other end of that African journey of arrival, diffusion, history, and legacy of surviving the Middle Passage, spending those 10 days potentially on Sullivan's Island, and now being brought to Gaston's Wharf to be sold, into the American slave trade, if you will. And so along that way, people lived, died, smallpox, other epidemics ravaged this communities, fires, whatever. And so people were buried where they were buried. So that's a reality. And so I think we in the 21st century have to talk about the history of place. To be truthful, the very place this building sits now, at one time was an African-American community.
It sure was.
Right. Individuals lived, breathed, died, worked, played, Anson Burr, right at this very space. But progress in the 20th century changed that. And you have some folks now, I believe, that's still alive who lived here, just as those who lived across the street from the museum's being built. I spoke to someone at church Sunday, said she grew up. I didn't know that. Across the street from where the museum's being built now.
Right.
And so that's the challenge that we as historians have today, is to share the light on things that people would prefer not to have a conversation. And I would say that's been a part of my journey these last 40 years. And so as I was sharing, when I realized that there were some missing pieces of the puzzle that had not been or were not being addressed at a place that's really about our American experience, then it has to be And so I can remember some of my early conversations with coworkers saying, we need to talk about these pest houses and the African slave trade. Well, that's not part of who we are. We need to be talking about Robert Smalls and what he did, passing this place and how that changed our American life. But that's not a part of why we are here. We need to talk about the members of the 54th who bled and died in July of 1863 on Morris Island. But that's not a part of who we are. And so I heard that a lot. And so one of the things I had to do is go beyond those who I always had conversations with that dressed like I did, and develop relationships with the College of Charleston or with folks at SC State or all the historians, and then bring them along, and often the things I could not say, have them to say.
Correct.
And so I think that's why, like a Dr. Brandy Powers, the relationship that we have, of the conversations we've had over the last many years has been helpful. And I would say that the Park Service today benefited, I think, from my exposure, my experience. This is not being prideful, for the wisdom
no, definitely.
that I think I was given in order to do that. And so when you asked earlier about retirement, a funny story, I did retire, at least legally,
Yeah, right?
in December of 2017. The next, I guess, couple of weeks later, I was out shopping in the Harris Teeter in Mount Pleasant. And two friends of mine came up and said, "Oh, Mike, you've retired now. You can come and help us." And so I said, "I'm only in Harris Teeter trying to buy some food to take home. I'm not looking for a job."
Right.
So I saw them again a couple weeks later and said, "Oh, Mike, we got this project down in Bluffton. We could use your help.
Right.
It's in the corridor. You can help us." I said,
Right.
"What did I say the last time I saw you on this aisle? I'm not looking for a job." And then one of the persons said to me, who I trust and I've known for many years, she said, "Mike, you don't have time to lay down on your couch at home.
Right. I understand
We
that.
need you.
Yeah.
All of us need you as much today as we have for the last 25 or 30 years.
Right.
And so you are not retiring unless you are dead."
Right. That's how it is.
And several weeks later, I did join them in a quest, doing some work. And then from there, others have asked, to be a part of.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. You're in high demand. That's why I said I'm thankful for you to be here today,
So I'm grateful.
We were just joking around about it before we started this, interview. But how many times have you been on C-SPAN or any of those networks and things like that? Huh?
Well, I've been on C-SPAN several times.
Okay.
For public events, CNN and the local stations and the New York Times, Washington Post. I'm not counting, okay?
Right.
Internationally, nationally, whatever.
But
Yeah.
I mean, that definitely
Just Google
speaks-
my name.
Right. That definitely speaks to your in demand. That definitely speaks to people respecting your knowledge and what you bring to the table and the
Yes, sir.
information that you share, which is greatly needed. Thank you so very much for
Yes,
all
sir.
that you share. Yes, technically you are retired, but what are you working on these days? I mean,
Okay. Well, I'm engaged actively with the International African American Museum.
Right.
I shared recently with a colleague from that institution that I was in the first board meeting for that institution in 2000. Okay, when
Right.
it began
Right.
as a conversation, as a dream, as a twinkling in Mayor Raleigh's eye. And in January of next year, the doors will be unlocked.
yes.
So I've been involved with it since day one. So that's one thing under my belt. SC State University, where I finished in 1982, I'm still engaged with the leadership there in terms of history, culture, and preservation of the campus, working directly on the preserving of Wilkinson Hall.
Wilkinson, yeah.
I'm involved with that. When I was with the Park Service, I was involved in the preservation of Loman Hall as it is now today.
I stayed in Loman Hall.
I did too. In 201 is where I found myself in the fall of 1978.
Yeah. I'm trying. I stayed on the second floor as well. I'm trying to remember the number though. I was only in there for a semester.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
My mom has some sort of documentation, but when she was a freshman there back
Okay.
in the 50s, that
Okay.
was when Loman was a brand new hall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
those
so
are
I'm involved with
iconic
that.
buildings.
Still providing some guidance, some conversation with the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. Still, and ironically, after 37 and a half years, still providing guidance and conversations with the National Park Service.
They're always going to come back to you.
Yeah. I keep reminding them I'm retired, but they keep calling me.
Of course they're gonna keep calling.
So some involved with that. Some statewide African preservation organizations and groups. I'm engaged. Talking about the pandemic and COVID-19. This organization had once belonged to the African Heritage Commission. We took on a task to document the experiences of African Americans during COVID-19. And for me, I was the architect of that. I don't know, I guess this is a spiritual guidance or leading here. This whole project came to me standing in line at Sam's. Yes.
Okay.
I was standing in line at Sam's. My wife said, "You got to go, Sam's, get the stuff."
Right.
Had my mask on, 6 foot from the person in front of me or behind me. And as I was standing in line praying what I wanted was in the store,
Right.
something said, "I wonder how people are feeling and how they're dealing with this whole pandemic situation that we're in now." And so I called the lead for the organization. I said, I just have this feeling that there's a project that came to me standing in line in Sam's about African Americans and their intersection with COVID-19. So she said, "Well, you're a historian, do your homework." So the first thing I did is I called the head of the Department of Archives and History, because that's the agency of record that deals with the history of South Carolina. And so I asked the director, I said, if I was to have the opportunity to come look in your building now, which holds the history of the state, and would you have any documentation of the treatment or how African Americans fared or what the state did to support them during the pandemic of 1918, 1919? And he kind of got quiet and he said, "No, nothing." And so I said, "But sir, in 1918, 1919, over half of the people living in the state were black. You have nothing in
Over
your
half.
building that spoke about what the state did to support them." And he said, "Nothing." I said, "Well, know this, sir. Whoever comes to this building in the future, and if they are asked that question of where we are now in this pandemic of COVID-19, they will not get that answer." So I reached out to Dr. Powers, some other historians around the state. I shared my feelings of standing in line in Sam's. And they said, "Mike, that's what we need to do." And so within probably a month and a half, 2 months of that, we launched Black Carolinians Speak, a portal that we started from scratch with no money, but money came to support it, in which African Americans around the state could share their experience and intersection with COVID-19, not just for today, but for the future. So people sent us pictures, what they were drawing, because they were at home in a quarantine. They shared their experience. Some lost family members, some survived it, some were hospitalized. So, they just talked about the breadth and scope of how COVID-19 affected them. And so the ironic thing about it, when we were doing our homework, we didn't really see any evidence of other individuals, groups, organizations, universities doing this around the nation. Even though we were being predominantly hit by it, that was not it wasn't happening. And so after we started, then people started calling us, "How did you do this?" and so forth. And so, again, I'm grateful that as a person of faith that I listened to what was in the inside of me to believe that something needed to be done and to lead. This is not a highway marker.
Right.
This is not the bench by the road. This is not an interpretive sign or an exhibit or wayside. But then this is still a legacy that's there now that people will know the experience of people of color in this state, in other states now, in COVID-19, because people then began to contact us who once lived here, but were in other parts of the country. So we had to make a decision, well, this is supposed to be by the folks that live in South Carolina.
Right.
But if people reached out to us who were once living here, but in other parts of the nation that wanted to share their experience, who are we to stop them?
Right. All right. Last question.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a book?
No,
What?
You're number
That's
10,000.
Okay.
You're number
I mean,
10,000 that have asked.
I'm just saying that there needs to be some documentation from, Michael that I can pick up or something.
Yes. Right now, I'm electronically booked. I guess when you Google things I've done or been involved with. But no, to answer your question, sir, that it's not. And to be honest, when you ask that, I'm grateful. When folks ask that on a consistent basis, because I get this often, and I understand the relevancy, I guess I just have to slow down, take the time, connect with some entity or someone. And people have offered, and these are people who you know have offered,
Right.
like a Herb Fraser,
So
have
now-
offered.
Herb, had Herb on the show as well.
Yeah, I have offered. So
Yeah.
I need to do. I think about it more, to be honest. I do. I guess I'm in a mode of reflection now, to talk about my experience, to share stories that I probably would not have 5 or 10, 15 years ago, and so I know what you asked, sir, is relevant. And it needs to
Definitely.
be done. Right now, my wife and I, we have an online store called Tasty Treats, where we sell our Gullah Geechee products online across the nation.
Right, yeah.
We're at the historic market several times a week. We're at the Mount Pleasant Farmers Market. We're other places around the Low Country that people can see us. So I'm still telling my story even from that angle, but to what you asked, I know I need to do that, sir. So
All
thank
right.
you very much for
Okay,
asking.
now I'm gonna nag you on it.
Yeah, well, just don't hag me, okay?
The hag. That could be a whole nother conversation.
Well, it can be. And I say that because I know now, in reflection of my experience, and I say this with all humility, that I know that I was called, chosen, appointed, and anointed for the things that I've been involved and been engaged with. And where I am now, such as you, thank you, sir, for our intersection, our collaboration, our conversation, our trust that we have in each other.
Yes.
And so I just want to say that publicly, and even to the Gilliard, seeing that I should sit on the stage with you. I'm just a humble servant, happened to be born in Florida, raised in King Street, filled with Gullah traditions and opportunities, blessed to be a part of an agency for the years I worked that I think have shaped, in some respects, the direction of our country.
Yes, indeed.
In some respects, or the direction of our state, our nation, or our community. And so I'm just grateful, sir.
Well, I'm grateful to you for, like I said, taking the time to be with us today and share what I think is just one little % of your knowledge. But man, that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you. And I hope that we get to work on something again. If you need me to write the foreword for your book,
Yes, sir.
or something, although mine will just say, "Here it is," that's it, and go.
Well,
But
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to you, your family, and the Gilliard for having me here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for tuning in.